So today I want to talk about Diablo 4's major issues, major problems. Part of my voice, I've been sick the last 24 hours, and I was in bed like 15 hours yesterday, but the grind doesn't stop, and I enjoy making videos, so it's kind of a break from laying in bed all day. But I figured today is a good day to do a video like this because we just had the patch a couple days ago. And the patch addressed a lot of things that people wanted addressed, right? Things like some of the skills being buffed. Some of them are pretty significant, although basic abilities aren't really that useful in terms of damage. They did buff a lot of the basic abilities, anywhere from like 10 to 25%. They buffed a lot of the nightmare dungeons and XP rates, and all of these things are things that people had issues with. But for me, those actually weren't the biggest problems in the game. And in fact, the problems that I saw weren't really addressed all that much. Some more slightly, but most were not. And I want to start off with the first issue, which is CC in the game. I was a little disappointed to see that this was not affected at all. No like diminishing returns or no, I guess reduction in amount of CC coming out from enemies, period, overall. And the reason I say this is because there are certain enemies in the game, like Cold Enchanted, or just enemies that have some sort of CC. Heck, even like spiders when you're running around and you get frozen all the time. First off, these are just not fun. And I think a lot of people just don't enjoy fighting them. But even let's say that fun aspect wasn't even a consideration, it actually just isn't counterable. And that's the problem. Some builds can and some builds can't. And then some classes have a really hard time and some classes have an easier time. For example, let me talk about the Rogue for a little bit. Rogue, Twisting Blades actually has a really easy way to deal with CC. In fact, I've never had a problem with CC on Twisting Blades Rogue because Twisting Blades resets my cooldown on Shadow Step, and I have 2 charges of Shadow Step, which gives me Unstoppable when I use it. A lot of people ask me, why do I run Shadow Step instead of Dash oftentimes? Because sometimes when I'm in harder dungeons, I'll remove Dash so that I can go ahead and, have some sort of either damage reduction skill or other damaging skill here. And the reason is because of Unstoppable. You need it. You absolutely need it in a lot of different scenarios, okay? And without it, you're just going to be struggling and oftentimes just die randomly because you cannot get out of the CC. Classes like, for example, the Necromancer have a really hard time with this. They have a few aspects that can help them out with this, and they have the Blood Mist. But the Blood Mist is almost 2.5 times the cooldown of Shadow Step here, and doesn't have multiple charges, and you can't reduce the cooldown by using something like Twisting Blades, or even going ahead and running with the cooldown reduction on Shadow Step with Disciplined Shadow Step, right? So Necromancer has a really hard time, but even ranged rogues have a hard time as well, because oftentimes you're not running Shadow Step on them. And then what CC break are you going to be using? I guess you could be using Concealment for the Unstoppable aspect, right? That has a similar problem to the Blood Mist, because although it grants you Unstoppable, the cooldown is also 17 seconds, which means that it's going to be really tough to actually get back over to this cooldown. And you might say, oh, well, just don't get CC'd for 17 seconds. And I would say you could do that, especially for pushing, right? And if you are a ranged character. But when you're talking about melee farming, there are just some situations where you're just trying to rush through and kill off everything, and they have no options. Like there are just some classes that have no options, and that is a major problem. The second thing that I wanted to address, which I consider a huge problem, and I'm going to pull up my Microsoft Paint, is the on-death mechanics in this game. So let's say you kill someone here, and they're dead. Here's my death guy. Wow, what a great drawing. Then you have, let's say, 1 million dead guys. So we'll just do a little bit of squiggles around here, because this is what it looks like, right? You just have a bunch of trash all around here. Like if you're playing Necromancer, you're gonna have corpses everywhere, and that muddies the water. You're gonna have rare items, right? Here's a rare item. Woo. Here's another rare item. Woo. Here's a legendary item. Let's do this, right? Okay, well now you start to not see the enemy, and then they have a death animation, and it looks like this. It's this little explodey ball, and has another circle around it, let's say, and then this charges up. It'll go all the way out to the edge, and then it'll explode, right? Some are not red, some are green, some are different colors, right? My point here is, it is very difficult to see that line, right? In fact, it may be better just to say that it's this color, because this is more likely. In fact, you have this color of a line, right? It kind of blends in with everything else. And you wait until that inner circle reaches the outer circle, expands, and it blows up. These death animations, I don't mind them, right? I don't mind that they're in the game. But with the mix of CC and the fact that you can't see them oftentimes, you have a big problem, okay? And I find that, especially on the Necromancer, you're going to find many more problems because it actually blends in with the corpses. And in fact, I try to use the corpses and I can't even see when the corpses are, my corpses, or if it's like a glowy orb thing that's about to explode. And overall, this ends up being a pretty massive problem, especially when you're in a situation where you're hardcore, and if you get hit by one of these, you're dead, because they're basically one shot, one kill. This needs to be looked at as well. I'm not sure how you would do it, but I think it's mainly just about reducing the animations or the textures on the ground so you can actually see these a little bit better. I think that'll be an easy fix to this because I don't want to see this be nerfed or removed. I think it's actually a really interesting gameplay mechanic, but the problem is that it's not counterable, as I said with CC, because one, CC, but also two, because you can't see it. And anytime you have a situation where the players cannot play around anything, I think that's a bad game design, and I feel like this is one of them. The last thing, and this was slightly adjusted in the recent patch notes, is build diversity. This, for the Rogue, for example, actually isn't that big of a problem because there are actually a lot of builds out there that I find pretty viable and I would use and not have too many issues with. In fact, they've already just buffed, some of the basic abilities like Heartseeker, Bleed Shift, Invigorating Strike. They buffed Barrage a little bit. I still find that a lot of these builds aren't as good as Twisting Blades, especially for farming. But it's okay if you have one build that's really good for farming, another build that's really good for pushing, another build for this, another build for that. And you're using all those builds to do different things. Although I would say that because the cost is so expensive in this game, well, you can't even do that all that much, right? So we have two issues here. One, some classes have a really, really hard time actually doing something that's kind of core to their identity. Take the Necromancer, for example. A lot of people are really, really annoyed with the Necromancer. I made a couple videos on the Necromancer talking about how it's actually a really, really good class. And in fact, this hasn't really changed from my initial opinion, which was that all the other specs were trash. Necromancer overall isn't that good, but there's one or two specs that is just really, really good. And that's exactly true with the Necromancer. Bone Spear is really, really good. But the problem is that no one wants to play Bone Spear every single day of their entire Necromancer life. I shouldn't say no one. Some people do not, right? And especially when you're in a situation where they even said themselves, they don't want any build around like a 30% difference between the builds. I believe that was the exact quote that they said. But they definitely said they want to balance all the builds out. Well, you look at Bone Spear, this thing's literally killing Uber Lilith in 10 seconds, maybe even less. And then you have Summon Necromancer, which is just dying. It's just dying. It can't do damage. It doesn't really do much. I would like to build one out myself and see what the viability difference is, because I've seen a couple videos and I've seen some. I've tested it a little bit myself, but it's expensive and I don't have the gear for it all set up. So this is a big problem. And this doesn't just apply to Necromancer. Things like the Fire Sorcerer, Fireball Sorcerer, is absolutely atrocious. Druid, some of the builds over there are pretty atrocious. Heck, even Barbarian, like Upheaval, feels pretty bad compared to Whirlwind, Hoda, etc. And this wasn't really affected, although I would say this is the one thing that was affected more so than the other ones, because they mainly focused on buffing up basic skills. That was their main focus. And I find that the way they buffed things was the damage of the basic skills, when the damage isn't really what we're using basic skills for, right? For example, I use Bone Splinters on the Necro because it is one of the best essence generating things, while also being a bone skill that can combo with my bone upgrades. In fact, you can see how they have 2 points into it. For Rogue, I use Puncture for the guaranteed vulnerable aspect. For the Sorcerer, sometimes people don't even use a basic skill. So a lot of people are, seeing these buffs and they're going like, what just happened? Where are these buffs coming from? Not to say that it's a bad thing, and I'm always going to be happy that they're addressing some sort of facts. And in fact, they could maybe buff basic skills to the point where they actually are used for damage. But what I will say is they didn't really change the core skill viability and the build aspect viability of a lot of different classes. So those are the 3 major problems that I see in this game right now. There are often a lot of other issues that I think make a better game, but I see these problems and, I see them as things that can really, really become huge problems in Season 1 upcoming. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, guys. Thanks for watching. Again, pardon me being sick. I might be sick for another day or two, but if you like the video, I'll guarantee that I'll recover faster. Thanks for watching. See you all tomorrow.